Hi guys, Dylan here. Today we're talking about a car that could really benefit from an exhaust, which is the 488, both Pista and GTB. The thing is, there's some key differences between the two cars, which are really important to understand. And there's also something that I just worked out, which is worth sticking around for, because I didn't know it, and I bet you don't either. Welcome to Eurospace. So just to begin with, what we're going to do is we're going to go through each element of the exhaust. We'll talk about the GTB first, and then we'll talk about the Pista, because there are a lot of shared components, but there are some key differences. But as always, we're going to start with the manifolds. Now, the manifolds are quite a simple set. They're 4 into 2 into 1, equal length headers, pretty standard stuff for a performance car. But the GTB, these are steel, but on the Pista, they're made of Inconel. So they follow exactly the same layout, but there is a material difference. Now, Inconel is a nickel chromium superalloy that was initially designed by NASA for the X-15. And the X-15 was a hypersonic rocket plane flown by Neil Armstrong amongst other Apollo astronauts before they went to space. And if the material is good enough for essentially atmospheric re-entry, then it's going to be good enough for your car. But why would you choose it over steel? Well, in very simple terms, you can use a much thinner gauge of metal if you use Inconel compared to steel to make something. And there's two big benefits there. The first is, obviously, it's lightweight. But then the second thing is, it's much more resonant. And that means that when you are firing exhaust gases down here, it creates much nicer high-pitched frequencies that end up giving you a better exhaust note. All of this while retaining the amazing heat management properties that Inconel has. Now, obviously, the 488 is quite different to something like an F12 or an 812. Because it's got big snails in it. So these are the turbochargers. There's not really much to say beyond them, other than a lot of people will complain that turbocharged cars don't sound great. And I actually take exception to that, because I don't think anybody has ever listened to a fully lit F40 LM or Audi Quattro and gone, that doesn't sound that great. But check this out. Luckily, at the moment, we've got not one, but 2 488 challenges in for braking. And what's really nice about this one is you can actually see, these are the manifolds coming out of the engine, and this is the turbo. So the catalyst sits right here. Luckily, this crash has actually pushed the subframe nicely out the way so we can see everything very clearly. Ordinarily, though, this would be probably more like here, and the cats would sit there. But you need to be careful with the cats. The GTB is a very, very simple equation. Take the cats out. It's that simple. People will often worry, oh, it's going to be too loud, but the reality is it's coming out of the manifolds, going through the turbo, that silences it quite a lot, and then it goes into the cats, right? Don't worry about it. You honestly can take the cats out and it will be absolutely fine. The only thing you need to think about are warning lights, OBD dongle, or a tune, happy days. The Pista is much more complicated. This is a 200 cell Chibi catalyst. And on the Pista, you absolutely have to install a catalyst of some description. They come in 2 flavors from Chibi. You've got 100 cell, 200 cell. As we explained on the previous video, the cell count refers to the number of perforations per square inch in the fabric. We'll show you inside this cat. It's nice and sort of unrestricted, lets a lot of the gas through. But the reason you have to have cats on a Pista is because it's very, very back pressure sensitive. If you take the cats out, you're removing a load of the back pressure from the exhaust. And for some reason, the Pista just hates that. It doesn't matter what you do, OBD dongles will not work. You have to get the car tuned if you're going to decat it. Much more simple to install. I would recommend 100 cell catalyst. You could do 200 cell, but as I said, it won't cause a warning light immediately, but it will in time as it becomes less efficient cause a warning light. Just go for 100 cell, they sound better, get the light managed right out the gate, and then you never have to think about it again. The rear silencer also is quite interesting. Now, the rear silencers between the GTB and the Pista are very similar, except for one key thing, which I'll tell you about in a minute. It's very interesting, and I didn't know it. What I think we should start talking about first is valve logic. Now, the GTB is very, very simple. It uses load request, which is an algorithm that measures your RPM, the speed of the car, and the percentage of your throttle input. And based on those 3 metrics, it decides whether it needs to open or close the valves. And the algorithm gets more sensitive the further right you turn the Manettino. The Pista, however, buckle up. Okay, I'm chuckling because it's very complicated, but I will do my best to make it as simple as I can. People who bought the GTB complained that it wasn't loud enough, right? Fair enough. So Ferrari did 2 things to address that when they came to the Pista. The first of which was to change the way the valves worked. What the valves now do is when you are sitting still, the valves are open, and that gives you the impression that the car is much louder. As soon as you start moving away, the valves then shut until you get to a certain point, at which point the valves will then open again. So essentially, rather than having closed at low, open at high RPM, you've now got open at standstill, closed when you move off, and then they open up again at the top end, also using loaded crest. But it took me ages to wrap my head around it, and what it means is that if you're sitting there with a remote kit in your Pista and you press the button, nothing will happen because the valves are already open. You will only notice the difference when you pull away. As standard, as I said, the valves will shut, but if you have your remote and you click it, when you move away, the valves will stay open. The second thing that Ferrari did is the most interesting. Now, the rear silencers between the GTB and the Pista are almost identical except for one thing, which is this little notch here. Now, I've been dealing with these things for years and I never really knew what it was for until I got the tips out today. So, here is a tip from a GTB. As you can see, it is literally an exhaust tip with bracketry and that is it. However, if we look at the Pista, it's got this weird tube on it. And that tube happens to perfectly line up with that notch when it's installed. And it's very, very clever. What they do is they pipe sound into the cabin. So let's go back to the challenge car and I'll point out where it goes. And the way it works is really, really simple. This has obviously had a bit of a bang, but the rear silencer would basically be about here somewhere. And the pipe comes off and it is literally just a tube for the sound to go down. It goes underneath the bodywork, under here, and it ends up going into the bulkhead. And there is a bit of membrane in the way to make sure that the exhaust gases don't actually come into the cabin, but it's that simple. It is an actual pipe that comes off the exhaust tip and goes into the cabin so that you can hear a bit more of the car. And then I guess the last thing to talk about are the aftermarket options for the rear silencer. It is worth saying that in the pecking order, the catalysts are a way, way more important part of the equation, but the rear silencer is also important. So this is a tubey straight through section, and this is how it works. So the exhaust gases come out of the catalyst and into the rear silencer. This is a pneumatic valve, and inside the pipe, it operates a butterfly that opens or closes. When the valve is closed and the butterfly is shut, the exhaust gases have come into the silencer. They cannot come out of this pipe, so they go into this more restrictive kind of cross blend section and then out the back. When the valves are open, then the exhaust gases just fly straight out the back. That's where the straight pipe comes. And the volume difference comes from basically having a more restrictive and lengthened exhaust as compared to the direct open straight through pipe. And now, as is tradition, I'm going to try and do a whip through one take of the exhaust to see how much information I can give you in one go. We'll start with the manifolds. The manifolds are very simple, 4:2:1 units. On the GTB, they're made of steel, which is a very standard material for exhaust manufacturers to use. On the Pista, they're made of Inconel 65. Inconel 65 is a good choice for a performance car because you can use a thinner gauge of material to make the exhaust components. It therefore weighs less, which is good for the dynamics of the car. And it's also more resonant, which means that the exhaust sounds better. And to add on to that, it has equal to, if not better, heat management properties as steel does. From there, we've got the turbos. Not going to teach you to suck eggs, but in very simple terms, the exhaust gases go through the turbos and spin up turbines. They compress air, force it through the engine. You can burn more fuel, you make more power. Happy days, everyone's happy. You've then got the catalysts. Now, this is the first real divergence between the GTB and the Pista in terms of the aftermarket anyway. We would recommend that you decat a GTB because that's what sounds best. However, we do not recommend that you decat a Pista because a Pista is very, very back pressure sensitive. So if you're running an OBD module to cancel the warning light, it will almost never, ever cancel the warning light because it's not designed to cancel back pressure warnings. Instead, we would recommend installing something like a 100 cell catalyst. If you wanted to, you could do a 200 cell catalyst, but it has to be a sport cat. Moving on. We've then got the rear silencers. Now, there are two things Ferrari did between the GTB and the Pista because people complained that their GTB was too quiet. The first was they have different valve logic. I won't go over it in too much detail, but basically the GTB is normal and the Pista, it opens the valves when it's sitting still, which no other Ferrari before it ever did. The other one, and this is the very interesting thing that I didn't know, is on the Pista, there's a little notch cut out at the exit of the rear silencer, and then there is this little pipe on the exhaust tip. It runs a pipe from here up along the bodywork, up to the cabin, and basically pipes exhaust note into the cabin directly so that you can hear more of it. But don't worry, there is a membrane in the way that makes sure that no exhaust gases get in. And that is the 488 exhaust system in basically its entirety. If you have any questions, I'm happy to clarify any that you have. Put them in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up because it really, really helps. Subscribe to see more videos like this, and we will catch you on the next one. Thank you very much for watching. See you later.